Hot 107.9 at Acadiana's hottest music. Here inside the Morning Buzz, it's Digital Chris Reed. And Chris, you said something earlier about the national media and the questions you see on Facebook. You know, now that we're cleaning up, now that we're pulling up our sleeves, now that we're taking out the sheetrock, and you're kind of looking around wondering, you know what, where was the national media in this huge natural disaster?
And, you know, if we're going to be critical of the national media, which we have been, and I say we, I'm talking, you know, people on Facebook, Twitter, whatever it may be. If we're going to be critical of them, why are we so concerned that they're not here?
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of times you see on social media, we say, oh, we don't need the media. We're anti-media. But when they're not here, we're mad at them. So I don't know why or how we make our mind up. But the thing is, what gets me is if the national media is going to show up for stories that depicts a community being divided, a la Baton Rouge, right? Okay. Why aren't you here in Baton Rouge? Why aren't you here in Lafayette when the community has come together as one? And that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, it's a big concern. And, you know, speaking of national media, the Huffington Post, over time, you know, you think of Huffington Post and it's right up there with CNN and ABC News because people consume a lot of their news, a lot of information online. And from the Huffington Post, an article gone viral, at least locally, the shares are just astronomical. Sky Cooley, we actually have on the line now, an assistant professor of public relations at Mississippi State University, joining us now. And Sky, what Chris just described is something you call the consequence of community, right? Good morning, by the way.
Oh, good morning, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I think that the media is in sort of a prisoner's dilemma in a lot of ways, right? It's got this polarization component really because of live events really drive news coverage these days, right? So because of TiVo and it's because of a lot of different reasons, but in the way people consume news now is online and self-selective a lot of times. And so national news coverage, what happens is they have to drive coverage that how do you get people to watch and bring in those advertising revenue. And the way that you do that is you have to cover stuff that's like a live event, like a tragedy or like a debate and get people angry. So when you have a community that is coming together in a crisis and it's not absolute pandemonium in the streets and chaos, it doesn't fit that narrative script that they need to pull in advertising revenue and get those and attract those eyeballs. And so they don't cover it. And that's a real shame. And it's something that we really, it has consequences to society. It has consequences to our politics. And it's not something that really gets discussed enough. And I'm just glad to have the opportunity to talk about it with you guys.
You know, I think what you're saying is the media will cover stories that, quote, sell. Okay, yeah, debates, police cars on fire, police officers being shot. But the image of a little boy I'm looking at right now, wrapped up in a blanket, sleeping on a rooftop, you can't tell me that won't sell. This will sell. There's some other reason as to why the national media elected to not cover this story. I'm looking at images from Denham Springs, Baton Rouge, South Lafayette that would sell. I'm looking at a kid sleeping in a shopping cart with water all the way up to it. You know, I'm sorry. These images sell. There is a story to sell from Louisiana, but the national media has neglected to tell the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that part of that really gets that it's a media culture that doesn't celebrate communities coming together. It's conflict driven, right? Like they want to drive conflict and they want to drive, you know, class wars, race wars. It's a shame. And you don't really get the coverage that shows people coming together, that shows people trying to help one another. And the Huffington Post piece that I'm writing for is they asked me to do this for the Olympics, right? And so I've got a blog piece for the Olympics. And I actually sent them an email like, hey man, is it okay if I write about this? Like I think that someone should write about it. And I didn't get a response, and so I hope that they don't. They're not too mad about it, but I had to write about it, so I did. And I think it's just a lot of us in these small communities that I grew up in. We feel neglected by national media. We feel neglected by national politics. That our voice isn't heard, and I just felt the need to do that and to write from what I considered our perspective, which is why don't we celebrate these small town, Americana communities coming together, like the good parts of our society.
Yeah. Is there a misconception that the cohesiveness, that black and white and old and young and rich and poor coming together, the image of, maybe a fisherman on a boat, going into a neighborhood maybe where he can't afford to live, but he's the guy who goes into the neighborhood to rescue a family in $1 million home, in his small little boat. But that small little boat is is there a misconception that doesn't sell, that isn't something that America would love to see, especially in a time where it seems like the media gets a bad rap for dividing the country on issues like politics, class, race, and the list goes on. Is there a misconception there?
Well, I know a lot of people that work in the media. My job is a professor. I work at a think tank, but I do interact with a lot of people from the media, and I think a lot of them, they want to do a good job. I think they get caught up in, really, it's this prisoner's dilemma. Like, they feel like if they don't cover certain stories certain ways, someone else will, and that will drive traffic. And so there are these narrative boxes that they package stories in. And if something's outside of that narrative line, it's not covered, and it's really a shame. And there's got to be a way for communities to be celebrated in ways that aren't divisive. There has to be ways to tell news stories that allow for conversation rather than polarization. I don't know exactly how, but I'll tell you, I'm glad that I got to write this piece and say that, because the responses have been really tremendous, and it's been really, I think another thing we don't talk about enough is spirituality and religion and these kinds of things, and the undertones that unite us religiously. And so I'm glad that I got a chance to say that and get to watch communities come together from radio.
Well, the national media may not tell the story of communities coming together, but I will applaud local media here in Lafayette, local media in Baton Rouge for telling both sides of the story, the good, the bad, the ugly, right? While we may be critical of the national media, let's give credit where credit is due. Local media, radio, television, and print have done a phenomenal job. Sky, thank you so much. Great work. Keep up the good work.
Man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks for reaching out, bud.
Okay, thank you, man.
Take care.